Hi everyone, I wanted to take a few moments and show you some of the brand new features in Adobe After Effects CS6, which was announced a couple of weeks ago and would be or should be out in May. So I've really enjoyed working with the application, and there are some really neat features that I think you'll get a kick out of as well. For those of you that like to use that free automatic duck import application that has been made available for free, you will be happy to know that the Pro Importer still works in Adobe After Effects CS6 in this build. And so what I've done is I've actually worked with a file to edit it down, taken with the Canon 5D Mark II, shot a little shot of some Avengers Legos figures that my son and I were playing with this past weekend. And one of the new features that you'll be able to access right away, and I think that you'll probably get a kick out of, is the hash cache feature. So you know how caching works. I'm building up a RAM preview of our shot, and you can see down here in the timeline that the RAM preview, the cached files, are appearing. And in previous versions, if I were to go in and just add some text on top of this, of course, the cache goes away and I'd have to make another RAM preview. Well, if I don't like this text, or I'm going to try to do something different with it, or even if I want to just undo a previous step, in this case I'm actually going to delete the entire layer, guess what? I get all of that cache back and it's ready to play through again. So that's really kind of a neat feature. But my favorite new feature in Adobe After Effects CS6 has to be the 3D camera tracker. Now, this is not going to replace this is not going to replace great tracking products like Mocha or the Foundry or anything from Buju, but it does a very decent job of tracking pixels in a clip and creating a 3D camera based on that. And over here in the preferences, there are a lot of things that that you can do. For example, you can go in and say it's a fixed field of view and let After Effects try to calculate that. You could specify your angle of view, and you'll have to really go online to find the angle of view calculator. For example, if you're using a 35 millimeter lens, the horizontal field of view is actually 54.4, so you could type all of that in. You can go in and do some of the advanced features, such as saying, hey, this is a very typical move. You'll also see that there is a tripod pan, which is included, and you can do a detailed analysis as well. You will notice that the analysis, it says it's analyzing in the background. This does mean that if you're working on other projects or other compositions, you can go over and work on that while this analyzes in the background, and it saves a lot of time. I'm going to go ahead and speed through this so we can see the analysis taking place, and you don't have to sit here for what could be up to 2 or 3 minutes, depending on how long After Effects needs to calculate this file. So what we have, it does take a few minutes to render. This footage was shot on the Canon 5D Mark II. These Lego figures are from the Lego Avengers movie tie-in. And as I've created this 3D camera, we can go in and see that indeed we do have two very, we'll zoom in up here. And you can see that we do indeed have a camera that does track through 3D space. Now, one of the problems that you're going to encounter, or maybe one of the frustrations that you may encounter, is the fact that you don't have the ability to really create a ground plane. What Adobe After Effects CS6 has done with the 3D camera tracker is it has tracked all of the pixels in space throughout the entire run of the clip, which is why it took a little bit of time to render. And then based on that, it creates these tracking points that we see here right on this character's face. And it uses these points, these pixels that it's tracked, to create a plane that we can then attach something onto. Now, we've already created the camera. As we look at these points, as I move between 3 points, I get this bullseye, this target that shows us what and how the element that we're going to attach would be oriented. I don't necessarily have to use the points that After Effects has determined, or I don't have to use the preset points to create the plane that After Effects has chosen. I could go in and select this point, and this point, and I would be able to create a tracking bullseye there. I think, over here, it doesn't have to be 3 points. I could choose this point, this point, this point, and this point, and I could get a very flat plane here as well. Or maybe it would be better to choose these. Let's choose these 4 points, and I can get a flat plane there. So over here on this character's face, I'm just going to go ahead and select these 3 points, and then I can right-click and choose what I want to create. In this case, I can create a text, a solid, a null object, or a shadow catcher in light. I can also delete the selected points and do some other things here. We're going to get to this create shadow catcher in light a little bit later, but right now I'm just going to create some text. And we'll go in here and you'll notice, and this might be a little off-putting to you at first, but because we don't have a way to scale this environment in relation to where the camera is or create our ground plane, by default, the scale on this tends to be rather large on these elements that you add in. So I'm going to lower this down to, let's try 800. And now we have a flat plane in our field of view based on the position of the camera and those individual tracking points. Now I can certainly go in here and change the different fields of the different orientations. I can set the the Z to 0 degrees. I could set the Y to 0 degrees. I could set the X rotation to like 6 degrees, and I can rotate these around. I think let's put this at about 25 degrees, and I still get this to track in 3D space. And again, we can go back to our 2D view and we can see that here's that element, here's our camera as the two are related to one another. Again, the scale is very misleading in this overhead view because the camera was actually about 3 to 4 inches away from the other elements in this shot. I can go in and I can do some slight repositioning of these elements. Now, certainly I need to be careful because if I go too far off the distance of this element, I'm going to lose my track completely, and it's not going to align as we move, as the parallax from the points shift over time. Let's go in and just to see if this will work, I'm going to go back and select my layer, and I'm going to go ahead and select these 4 points that we were looking at before. Doesn't have to be those 4 points or those 5 points. But I'm going to go ahead and create another text, and I'm just going to label this one A. I'm going to put a big Avengers A right here on the front. Scale that down to, let's try 100. 100 might be a little bit too small. And again, we can track this through the shot. And we see it does a pretty good job of tracking that flat plane all the way through. Now we are going to, and you'll see this again in just a few moments, we're going to see some parallax, or I'm sorry, some overlap from the footage with the track. But overall, this does a fairly decent job of going in and tracking our points. We can do this again, and I'll just kind of speed through here so you can kind of see the process. I need to go back to my layer. I need to select the 3D camera tracker. I'm just going to go in here and select 3 points. Let's try this point. And this kind of does show you some of the potential problems that you can have with the tracker in that it wants to orient a plane maybe a little bit differently than you do. But again, I can go in and adjust these elements ever so slightly to get the effect that I want. So we'll go in here and we'll change this scale to 800, I think is what we had on the scale here. Yep, 800. And then we'll just change the rotation to the same amount that we had before. And again, I can go in and do some slight modifications to the positioning of this element. You know, to be honest, probably the better way to move these elements in space, if you need to, is to actually move the bullseye. So in this case, as I look at Iron Man here, let's say that I want to use these 4 points as my plane, but I really want the text to be up here. And I run the risk, even if it's just a little bit, I run the risk of having the alignment and actually sticking these elements, whether they be a solid, a null, or whatever, to my object, having that being thrown completely off if I move it too far away from the source. Now, the interesting thing is, as I've already selected these points, when I move to the center of the bullseye, you'll notice that my cursor changes to a move icon, and I can certainly move that bullseye up to the position that I want it, and then create my text. And I don't know why we're having it jump that way, but we'll go in. Change this to the values. You can see I can go in now, since this is a double line. I can make some adjustments to that text. If I need to, I can even, it's already centered, but I can make those changes. And now I can just move this up just slightly. And we can see that working. So let me just very quickly go through and do this same thing again with each of these others. And keep in mind, as I'm doing this, I don't have to use, I can pick these points myself, or I can use whatever After Effects is saying is the point that I should use. And again, I'm just going to move this up. I could do that, and I don't have to create text. I could create a solid. I could create a null object if I was going to place something else there a little bit later. But in this case, in this example, I'm just going ahead and creating a bunch of text. Here's a really good place where the 2D planes that we have and the 3D text elements might throw you off just a little bit. We have some really great tracking. It is occurring in 3D space. We can see that very well in this piece. But then as we get to the end, suddenly that Captain America text that we expect to be further in the background is now overlapping with the Hulk. And so what we're going to have to do is create a mask around this arm, so that as it moves, it covers up that portion of the text and adds a little bit more credibility to that, to the fact that this is all taking place in the same space. So let's do that really quickly. I'm simply going to duplicate this layer, remove the effect, move this to the top of the stack, and then I'm going to create a mask. Now, this isn't an exercise in masking, but we're going to just do that really rough in this example. But another feature that you might want to check out, we're not going to spend a lot of time in this example, is the Mask Feather tool, which allows us to go in to an area like this and soften the edges. And instead of softening all the way around, like most of us are very much familiar with, I can create an area that's soft just in this area, and I can pull points back in this area and make it very hard. So I've got a nice feathered edge right along these spaces, but the rest of it, remains quite solid in the variation of that mask. So you get a nice little feathered edge right along here. So the variable feather mask is another great tool in Adobe After Effects CS3. So one more, and again, I'll move through it very quickly. Actually, probably two more elements, because there's a couple of other things I want to show you in this exercise. Now, in this one is going to be a little bit interesting as well. Most of the time, I've been tracking the face of the character to create the plane. However, in this character, because of the position of these points, the plane actually faces down. This character is actually leaning forward. So you're going to have to be a little bit more careful, or I am going to have to be a little bit more careful in how I select the points in this shot. But do keep in mind, if you're wondering why your bullseye or your target isn't aligning the way you thought it might be, it might just be because the pixels that After Effects is tracking are actually the correct plane that that you're not seeing. And of course, we can do all sorts of other things with this text. I'm just going to select all the text here, and I'm just going to put a nice little bevel around it, because as we start to move through this comp, you can see that, oh, we have to move that mask. You can see that the overlap is going to cause some confusion in separation of those elements. So one thing that I'm going to do is just very quickly put a black stroke around this text so that we can see it a little bit easier. And why don't we just go ahead and increase that to, or leave it at 1. And then let's get rid of this this mask. And so as we make another RAM preview, let's see what we have. Doesn't look too bad. 3D text in a 3D space. And because we've used our masks correctly, we've got the overlap taken care of right there. But there is a little bit more that we can do to this piece to enhance it just a little bit. And to do that, I'm going to go all the way down to the end of this piece. And I'm going to create one more bit of text. And this text I'm going to actually place on the ground plane. And to be honest, this might be the best spot for it. If I want to move it forward or backward later, I can certainly tweak it just a little bit. But just by default and just by happy coincidences, I think this might be the place I'm going to do it. I'm going to create some text, and then immediately I'm going to go ahead and create a shadow catcher and light. And what a shadow catcher is a white layer that has accept shadows turned on only. So it's not casting shadows. It is not coloring the scene. The only thing that it's doing is accepting the shadows. And as I go back to my text, and as I create this text and then rotate it up, and change the scale, you can see that my shadow catcher is indeed catching the light. And you're maybe a little hard to see at this point because the default light placement is way off. And so it looks a little strange. I'm going to actually scale this one up quite a bit so that we can see more of that shadow being cast. So a couple of things that I'm going to need to do in order to tweak this a little bit more is to position the light, change the shadows, color the light, and really I need to add 2 lights. I've got an orangish colored light coming in this way and a bright daylight coming in from this way. So let's go over to my lights and reposition that. Get it at just about the right angle. We can go into our light settings and change the color. And I'm just going to eyeball this. And one more. We do want the diffusion to be a little bit more pronounced. Okay. And so now we've got a shadow, and we can go in and change that diffusion a little bit. We've got our text element that's there. I'm going to just rotate this a little bit more on this y-axis so that we can see what's going on. And as we look at this, we may even need to just move it up because the tip of the A is not in contact correctly with our shadow catcher. There it goes. So there's just a little bit more tweaking that needs to go on, and I think I want to soften that shadow up just a little bit more. We'll see if that does anything. Otherwise, we'll just let it work. You're just seeing how this can be put together. I'm actually going to add another light in, and this one we know we're going to make very blue. We'll leave everything else the same. Call this one rim light so we know which one we're working with. And this light, again, going back to 2 views. So you can see our shadow catcher is now casting 2 shadows into this scene. And if we look at the overall, and there we go, a look at all of our elements. Obviously, there's a couple of things we have. Some issues with the shadows being cast from the shadow catcher. The easy fix for that is to go in and change the size of the shadow catcher. And again, we can add some more masking in. I think just for this example, I'm going to pull this back a little bit just so that you can understand that this is going here. In reality, I would spend some more time masking off the leg and the body so that we don't have the shadows being cast. But you can put these, the shadow catchers anywhere. If I wanted to put the shadow catcher on part of the helicopter in here in the background, I could do that and give the illusion that the text is casting its shadow on the background. So what else do we need to do to tweak this this setup that we have? Well, I think one thing that would work really well is certainly just turning on motion blur for all of our text elements that we have in the shot, because that will enhance the movement that we have, especially in this part where everything kind of looks a little static, where the 2 elements don't look correct. And again, we'll just do a really quick RAM preview. And now that motion blur of the camera and the text blends a little bit nicer. Now, I know what you're thinking. Stephen, the 3D camera tracker is great. I already have about a bamillion ideas on how to incorporate this. But the one feature that I heard was really cool in Adobe After Effects CS6 was creating actual 3D text. And yes, dear viewer, you can create 3D text in Adobe After Effects. But I want to give you a little heads up. In order to maximize the speed and the performance that you're going to get with the new 3D feature, you really have to have some very specific hardware. And unfortunately, I'm doing this on a Mac, an iMac, 27-inch iMac. It doesn't have the card. So what's happening, or what you're going to see, is you're going to see a lot of slowdown over the next couple of minutes. And what's happening is, instead of pushing all the computations off to the GPU, everything's going to stay with the CPU, and that's going to slow things down considerably. So what I'm going to do for the moment is I'm just going to go ahead and leave these elements on and the background element on. I'm going to turn off all the other text for a moment because we really don't have to worry about looking at that. And in order to access the new 3D feature, I'm going to go over here to the top where it says render and it's set to the classic 3D. I'm just going to change this, and if you need to change it and you don't have this option or you don't see this option, you can always go into the compositions settings and change it under the advanced tab. And I'm going to change the renderer from the classic 3D to the ray trace 3D. And when I click OK, I'm going to get a warning that says, hey, here's what you can do with this 3D renderer. Here's what you can't do by the ray trace 3D renderer. Including track mats, layer styles, blending modes. You can't do that with those elements. So once I click OK, you can see that little stopwatch. It's taking a minute to calculate what it needs to do to this 3D text. So, how do we access these 3D features? Well, I'm going to go over here to my text and twirl it down. And you'll see we still have our text elements. We still have our transforms, which are nice. We also have our geometry options. And this is the new area where we can turn on beveling. We can extrude our text or extrude a shape that we have. So in this case, I'm just going to go with an angular bevel. And I'm going to increase the extrusion. I think in this case, let's go 15 pixels. So we're going to give this a little bit of thickness. And now we instantly have some 3D text that looks pretty good when we look at it from the from a close-up, and we can see what it's beveled and how it's angled and all of these different kinds of things. Now, at this point, you don't have the ability to really create textured surfaces. I mean, there's a number of different ways you could create the illusion of a textured surface, but you can't say, hey, apply a bump map to this face. What we can do, however, is we can go in and change some of these elements. And maybe that angular bevel doesn't really work there. What would happen if we change this to a 1? Let's just take a look at it. And you can see every time I'm making a change, it's having to recalculate this file or this render. Now, I do want to, going to leave it in this view and kind of in this position because we do have a couple of different lights coming to the scene. We have our orange light, which is casting the overall color, but you can see especially along the edging and the beveling on the back of the text, we can see that blue text or that blue light having an effect here as well. Also keep in mind that you have concave and convex bevel types, and this is certainly going to change the look of this 3D text that we've created very dramatically. And there you can see that. Now, as far as surfacing the individual elements, what I'm going to do is we can certainly have material options that you're very familiar with, and you can set base, diffusion, specular intensity, and all of that, the specular shininess. But you can also set it on a per face basis. We're not really concerned about the back at this point, but for the front, for example, if we wanted to increase or change the diffusion or the specular intensity or the shininess or making this more metal or not, we could certainly do that simply by adding that animator to the text. And we'll see what this 100% metal front surface looks like. Not too much of a difference. On the bevel, let's say I want to change the color. And I want this bevel to be a lot darker than what we currently have. So I'm going to make this really dark. And I'm also going to add in some specular intensity and some specular shininess. I'm going to change the shininess up to, let's say, 80% and change the intensity up to 75%. Not seeing too much there, maybe because we've made it so black. Now, as far as surfacing goes in this piece, We do have the ability to use environmental maps to create some nice reflections. So if we wanted this to actually be super shiny and reflect the environment around it, After Effects CS6 does give you that ability to do that, add that element into the scene as well. We're not going to go into that in this part because, as you can tell, the system really slows down with each and every change that we're making to this piece. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to end it right here, and we're going to take a look at the final RAM preview, and hopefully this gives you a good look at what some of the new features in Adobe CS6 are, and what you might be able to do with it in the near future. If you're wondering why we don't have the outline or the stroke around the text, remember, we've converted everything from a 2D classic render into this ray trace 3D render. So in effect, whatever I did to the Avengers, I would then need to go back and apply to these elements as well. So if I wanted to extrude all of these, I could certainly do it, but because we're now in this new rendering environment, I would need to go back in and change the stroke amounts and add those stroke elements in there. It's one of the things that, again, in this stage, still cause a little bit of confusion, but certainly it's easy enough to go back in and make that change. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this look at Adobe After Effects CS6. If you have any questions, just use the comment section below or head over to StephenSchleicher.com and look for more information on Adobe, my thoughts, and some future tutorials as well.